AZ himself held a total of 4 Pokemon we knew about: Torkoal, Sigilyph, Eternal Floette, and of course, Golurk. I bet since Legends ZA was first revealed that Mega Golurk would be given to us and by ARCEUS wasn't delivered. But this gargantuan golem is a living treasure trove of secrets. From guarding ancient kingdoms to being a harbinger of destruction, Golurk has only ever lost battles in lore to legendary Pokemon, and Ash, I guess. But now with its seal broken and a pair of ethereal wings composed of Mega Energy, Mega Golurk has gone nuclear, and I'm ready to tell you all the secrets that this bad boy is hiding inside of that mechanical body. Howdy there, I'm Krillic, and whoa, I went a little hard on that. Howdy there, I'm Krillic, and in order to fully understand Mega Golurk, we need to begin with Golett, where we find it, its inspiration, and more. Golett, to begin with, were molded from clay and brought to life thousands of years ago through ancient science, with the purpose of serving their makers as laborers for heavy-duty work, and they also kind of look like little cannonballs. The specific use of science in their info is what immediately makes me think of AZ once again, a man who has been made clear as one of the most intelligent and wise people in all of Pokemon. A man who created a machine that could revive his Floette, then turned that machine into what would be known as the ultimate weapon. I personally like to claim that AZ may have even been one of the people, if not the first person, to create Golett and Golurk, but there is not a ton of direct evidence for this other than Golurk being on his team and AZ being a man of science as stated. And I suppose you could add in the idea that both are incredibly long-lived, so, you know, 1 time is an event, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a pattern. But to contradict this idea, we can look at all the locations that we find Golett at. The first place is a place where we don't have any solid evidence of AZ's actual physical appearance, being Unova, and more specifically, Dragonspiral Tower. And I know what everyone is gonna say. There's the entire Abyssal Ruins theory that has a fleur-de-lis symbol in it, and Superior also following this motif, but despite these connections, we have yet to receive confirmation of AZ being there, even though I would also love to believe this theory. In fact, we actually got information that AZ at least saw Galar's darkest day instead, but still nothing saying he was actually in Galar, even though, again, I would like to believe he was. Back on track, Dragonspiral Tower is an incredibly sacred place within Unova. In fact, the material used to make this buried castle is noted to be incredibly unique. More than this, the material used to make Dragonspiral Tower is the same material used to create the DNA splicers. This item is what's necessary to fuse Kyurem with either Reshiram or Zekrom, but it is not inherently powerful enough, or enough in general, to allow all 3 of them to be fused together into the original dragon once more. It's also here at Dragonspiral that it is clearly noted that this is where both Reshiram and Zekrom were born, meaning that potentially at this tower is where they had split from the original dragon. This is where the heroes of Unova stood to represent their people, and through their clashing of ideals and truths, the dragon was split into 2, with the leftovers becoming Kyurem, as we all know. If you also manage to not capture one of the dragons before fighting N in the original Black and White games, this is where they will then appear after the main events, waiting for someone to come to them and take the mantle of becoming Unova's next hero. With this being incredibly sacred grounds, it's easy to understand why we find Golett here, though it's a bit puny at the end of the day compared to Golurk, and it makes you wonder why we don't see it here in the first game. And that's the key word, first. Because when we play Black 2, White 2, Golurk does spawn inside the tower in place of Golett. The trigger, of course, being that the 2 legendary dragons must have returned here at some point, causing all of the wildlife in the area to have actually been spurred on by their energy and overall presence. This would also explain why the light and dark stones can be found again, because after the main event of the game, while N would have kept his dragon, the other dragon would have been released by the protagonists of the first Black and White games. It would then return to this tower for some time and wait, even in its dormant stone form, for when it would be needed again. And for every powerful being, for every great ruler, there must also be a guard, allowing Golett to build itself up into the form of Golurk, but we'll get to that theory later. We can then move on to their next location, in which we find them being Route 10. Route 10 is the route connecting to Geosenge Town, which is the place in which the ultimate weapon was buried by AZ's brother. Already, this makes Golett's presence here incredibly significant once more. The many stones or graves that we find here are actually menhir stones, large stone obelisks that are a bit tricky to understand even in the real world. But within Pokemon, effectively, these stones existed as an ancient form of the way AZ absorbed the life energy of Pokemon to revive Floette. Also, to make it clear, this isn't Kalos, because while they naturally absorb energy, when a Pokemon is attached to them, then the Pokemon's life energy is absorbed from them, slowly turning them to stone, while then releasing that power for the ultimate weapon to then absorb, which of course would have also held Xerneas, Yveltal, or both, depending on which version of the timeline or games that we're looking at. What's even more interesting is that this is the only route where we find Golett and Sigilyph, both Pokemon also existing on AZ's team as stated in the intro, meaning that they definitely held a much greater purpose, and maybe even both of them were created by AZ for the first time within Kalos at the very least, not talking about their first creation in other regions. We might even be able to assume that Golurk may have existed on this route long ago, even though we don't find it here, now in the modern day, especially as it is seen as a great and powerful Pokemon meant to defend humanity. Meanwhile, Sigilyph is a patrol Pokemon that will move around any area it's in, and if you intrude on that area, there are 3 different dangerous things that it might do. 1, it will start blasting you with psychic power. Not that big of a deal, I guess. 2, it may sound a few alarms to scare you away. And 3, this is something we only see in Pokemon Snap for the Switch. Sigilyph will not just raise alarms, but actively call for backup as a swarm of Golurk fly in like the living rockets they are to then crowd around you as an intimidation tactic. You can then imagine what would come next if you were an actual threat. Putting all this information together, it might make you wonder why Sigilyph and Golurk are so incredibly important, or even be created to serve humanity in this area. On one hand, you could of course say that we know there were other regions jealous of Kalos' prosperous life and were already waging war on it. But on the other hand, AZ was tampering with life and death itself, messing with the natural cycle, the ecosystem, taking the lives of many to revive the one, his Floette, and then would eventually snap mentally, deciding that he would create the ultimate weapon that would end the war through destruction unseen in that day and age. And to do so, he needed to capture Xerneas, Yveltal, or again, both. But of course, we know one very special quote-unquote god of the ecosystem that we know would have never just allowed this, which is Zygarde. Little old Zygarde here, there's no real confirmation in the games about this whole interaction that happens. Meanwhile, in the manga, AZ makes it very clear to Team Flare that because they are messing with the legendary Pokemon of Kalos, that Zygarde will be appearing soon, but probably not 100% Zygarde. More like maybe 10%, 50%, or at least the cells, which makes it seem pretty puny all in all. But this then tells us that AZ once went toe-to-toe with Zygarde in the past, ultimately making it seem as though AZ had conquered the complete cycle of life and death through defeating or keeping Zygarde from stopping his plans. I'm sorry, baby, I'll come pick you up. How he did this would be through an effective army of Golurk and Sigilyph, or at least that's what I strongly believe with the evidence that we have here. After all, there are great examples of Golurk fighting and winning just about every battle, with its only losses being to legendary Pokemon, Ash and Ash/Go. So they hold enough power that an army of them could theoretically defeat most, if not every legendary. Not counting ARCEUS, I assume, maybe Dog, Palkia, Giratina, don't really know. Of course, then, over the course of 3,000 years, AZ would depart, and other than the one at his side, Golurk would no longer be around. They would crumble down into their Golett form, or maybe they've been destroyed in multiple battles. But again, more on that idea later. Taking a stone skip across the water, we land in Alola, but we're staying nowhere near the water, as we have to trek through Ula Ula Island and into the Haina Desert. Now, Golett is not found in Sun and Moon naturally at all, but within Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, we do find it here in this desert. Even more specifically, it isn't even found as a normal encounter, but is instead found only when another Pokemon calls for SOS, almost like a guard responding to an emergency situation. The Pokemon who do call for it, though, are Alolan Dugtrio, Krokorok, and Trapinch. Now, Alolan Dugtrio and Trapinch really aren't much to talk about in relation to Golett, at least not that I could find, and meanwhile, we can find solid reasoning as to why Golett would show up for Krokorok. With Golett, again, being a protector Pokemon, and the Ruins of Abundance being so close by, those ruins being the worship site of Tapu Bulu, it makes sense why we would then find Golett here. We could say that it's protecting Dugtrio and Trapinch from digging and destroying the area, or that it is actually protecting them from other threats, but for Krokorok, we could say that Golett is actually protecting the ruins from our resident crocodile. Especially as while Krokorok isn't necessarily a bandit, it is often associated with less savory trainers like burglars and thieves. Though there's even more to the desert than meets the eye, especially as we take two more Pokemon into consideration, one being Baltoy, the other being Celesteela. And just to quickly clear the air, Ultra Beasts are considered Pokemon canonically, just from a different universe. This is why Pokeballs do have a very small chance to work on them, but Beast Balls are just designed to work better, to find their Pokemon DNA easier. Back on track, Baltoy also only appears in the desert within the Ultra Moon version, but it's also the only version of Alola in which Celesteela also appears. This is incredibly significant because just like Golett, Baltoy is made from clay, and when we look at Baltoy's Ultra Moon Dex, it states nothing but Claydol, its evolution, does. The ancient people who made it apparently modeled it after something that descended from the sky. It fires beams from both arms. Sounds pretty familiar to a certain Celesteela, doesn't it? They both hold the same basic body type, both fire energy from their arms, and they both only exist in the Ultra Moon version. This is all the stuff that you might be familiar with, but something that nobody else talks about is Golett is actually exclusive in its presence within this area as an opposite to Baltoy by actually only existing in the Ultra Sun version, and I made the mistake of saying Ultra Moon earlier, didn't I? That mistake aside, continuing on, while Golett, Golurk, and Celesteela have similar colors and Golett has a body of clay, the ancient people of Alola would have made it in worship of potentially Tapu Bulu instead of Celesteela in an aim to protect their shrine of worship for the spirit guardian. Now follow me on this, because not only is Tapu Bulu incredibly revered, but it is also known to be a force of destruction that was angered by the people who tried to build the Mega Pokemart and not only destroyed it, but also destroyed an entire village in its rampage. Strange then, that a guardian could also be such an angry force of destruction, kind of like what we know about Golurk and its own personal rampage when its seal is removed. And to tie this even further together, we can look how important clay is in not Alola, but rather Hawaiian culture. Now, this isn't to say that clay itself is heavily worshipped, but rather that it is a very rare raw material. So if you have something that is rare, you're not going to use it to build a bunch of houses and make a bunch of random pots like what we would see in other cultures throughout the world. In fact, while there are tons of ancient civilizations that have rich histories, we can read through their clay creations, Hawaii does not have that, and it was far less common wherever it did exist. Take this knowledge then, and we apply it to Alola, where Mudbray and Mudsdale served to chew up the ground and help make clay. And thus these two Pokemon were seen as such incredibly valuable creatures that while the rest of the world were busy making them extinct due to food shortages, as we see in Galar's history, that the ones we find in Alola were some of the only living creatures in any region for a while that we are at least made aware of. So to kind of summarize and tie all of this together clearly, clay is a rare resource. Alolans use it rarely, but when they do, they use it for culturally significant themes. This would include houses for some, but religiously, it would be used to create Pokemon like Baltoy, Claydol, Golett, and theoretically Golurk, despite never seeing it in the wild here. And I can nearly guarantee that Golurk would have been created and used to great degrees in the past, because a character that follows tradition and would take up the mantle of Kahuna would have a Golurk on her team, and that is Hapu, who also has a Mudsdale on her team. Though, strangely, Hapu is not the kahuna of Ula Ula, but rather of Pony Island, which, to be entirely fair, is a place that would have far more clay readily available based on the geology, geography, you name it. And we'll come back to Hapu and other significant trainers with Golurk on their teams later. For now, I want to move on to the last place where we find Golett and Golurk all over the freaking place. But before we get to that, I just want to say thank you for watching. If you're enjoying this so far, please do make sure you subscribe and leave a comment whether you agree, disagree, or maybe I missed some information. I'm only one person. In addition, I read last week's best comments at the end of the video, so it's a way to encourage you guys to give some great comments, as I do love reading them. And if you'd like to go the extra mile, you can always become a member for as little as $3 a month. You get early access to videos, you get members exclusive videos, you get your name at the end of the credits of every single video, and it just supports the channel in a great way. So thank you to our members on Patreon and YouTube, and thank you for watching the video, and on with the video. Galar has so many old castles, so many old settlements that are still lived in, and so many castle walls still standing that it makes perfect sense to see the highest modern population of Golett and Golurk existing within this region. And trust me, each of these places actually have significance to them. Starting with Route 8, which half of it is just one big archaeology dig site for ancient ruins. Here we find a number of ghost Pokemon such as Haunter and Dusclops, who basically just represent ghosts and mummies, and yes, mummies were in Europe. And while this is something I mentioned in my Ecology of Galar video, there were some crazy rich people who thought that eating mummy skin, that good old jerky, would actually give a number of different benefits. What those benefits are, I'm not really sure, but clearly eating human jerky hasn't created any superheroes, so it didn't do squididdly unless there's an entire group of superhero mummy-eating skin people underneath the earth, and I'm not getting into those conspiracies. Pokemon conspiracy video would go pretty hard, actually. There is another ancient creature living in this area, which is Bronzong, who has some very interesting info about it within Galar. The shield entry states many scientists suspect that this Pokemon originated outside the Galar region, based on the patterns on its body. In Violet, Legends Arceus, and Pokemon Black's Dex entries, it also talks about opening portals to another world. So there's a chance that Bronzong might not even be native to Paldea, Sinnoh, or Unova, meaning that Kalos and Oris's version of Hoenn are the only places where Bronzong could be natural to the area. Of course, then we could tie it all back to AZ once more, but that's still a bit of a stretch. Though since these Pokemon can create rain, it might be a saving grace to regions that may have been heavily affected by war or disaster. It would even explain why they were worshipped, and especially when Galar went through an extreme cold period, warmth and accessible water would have been vital for survival, and thus it would explain why we find Golett here, not only as a protector of the ancient civilization that once lived on this route, but also for helping protect Bronzong. And one other very interesting detail is, how do you get clay? You make it rain. You make clay and mud through rain and the soil itself, meaning that Bronzong could be the reason why Golett is found here. But that would also mean that Bronzong needed to be brought to this region by someone or something. That I don't have any answers to, but maybe you do. Up next, we do find Golett in rolling fields, which I couldn't actually find a strong reasoning for, but we also find Baltoy here once again, who is also noted to have been found near ancient ruins in these Shield Dex entries. Nothing too technically significant beyond that. But attached to this area, which could explain the Golett population here, is Dappled Grove and North Lake Mylock, where we also find Golett. They're wandering around, with Dappled Grove leading us to the Watchtower Ruins, which is home to a special Pokemon den that only reacts to Dynamax crystals. This gives us a place that can only have max raid battles and can hold a Golurk inside of it, showing us just how significant these ruins once were before they fell. Maybe it was a great site of some of the first Dynamax or even Gigantamax Pokemon. Opposite to this, North Lake Mylock leads us to Giant's Seat, and while it isn't attached, we also find it in Giant's Cap, with a wandering Golurk in the seat, but strangely enough, not in the cap. But, of course, and stay with me, the Giant's Cap attaches to Stony Wilderness, where we do find more Golett, Sigilyph, a wandering Golurk once again, Bronzong, Claydol, the Grim Reaper that is Dusknoir, and despite all these incredibly significant Pokemon in this area, it still is not quite an area that seems to hold anything truly significant that I could find. Unless we look not at Legends of Europe, but rather of Japan. Because with all these areas being related to giants, we would of course get the eventual appearance of Regigigas and the rest of the Regis as events within Galar. This then relates to one of Regigigas' inspirations, the Daidarabochi, who was stated to be so large that its steps and even where it fell would create lakes. Thus, we get the cap where a giant's head fell, the step from one of its many steps that it took, the Giant's Lake Mirror, all of these hinting towards the existence of Regigigas in its true, full, glorious size, and not whatever size we get to see it in the games. This would further explain the appearance of all these other Pokemon that are significant signs of important ancient civilizations. They were here as a way to protect the people who would worship Regigigas and the rest of the Regis, or at least those that would make home in its wake. The people who would make the first civilizations in Galar that would fall, while others would continue to stand. Added acrylic here as an alternative to this theory in the idea that Regigigas created all of the other Regis via its hands, molding them from the various materials that they are created from. Humanity wanted to replicate this, creating their own creatures as a response, whether that be Boltoy, Claydol, Golett, Golurk. They are all creatures created by hand, golems that would then reflect the golems that were created by Regigigas. And of course, they had made Goletts to try and work as laborers, but it may have not been enough to survive the harsh climate, leaving wandering Golurks behind alongside other ancient Pokemon. Now, I'm not going to be counting the other raid battles because those get a little bit arbitrary with all the other masses of Pokemon included in them, and so we are instead going to move on. Now, I hinted at it a number of times, but there are a few details that Golett has that leads me to believe that Golett doesn't actually evolve into Golurk, but instead combines their bodies with each other and more clay to create Golurk. Almost like Magnemite turning into Magneton or Meltan turning into Melmetal. Golett states it runs on a mysterious unidentified energy ever since the moment it was born, but this energy is speculated to run out soon, for unclear reasons. Golett then has been reported to continually line up boulders. And when we look at Golett, we see a spiral emblem on its chest with bands around it. And when we look at Golurk, we find the same symbols attached to Golurk's shoulders and its hands, all of them glowing. And if we look at the arms and legs of Golett, we even find that they have the same formation or texture as we find in the fingers of Golurk. This then means that Golett are rolling boulders together so they can remold their bodies of clay, combining their forms and energy together so they can cycle it and become infinite in their own right. But something still goes wrong. The center of their body cracking open for some unknown reason and having to be patched up with a little bandage, a seal for their power. Sealing, the deal on this is that you can find Golurk having a 5% chance of carrying light clay, representative of having clay on your hands after trying to form something new. Alright, can I put this up here? Can you just like sit nicely? Thank you. Whether it was the Golett who first put themselves together this way or the humans who created Golurk in this way, something strange happens no matter what, and their power is already extremely high. In fact, if they truly do have infinite amounts of energy, then having this crack in its body might be necessary to make sure they don't just, blow up if they aren't constantly battling other Pokemon or warring armies. In other words, it's like letting the faucet drip to relieve pressure in a pipe. And when that bandage is fully ripped off, then Golurk's energy can run wild as the faucet is turned on full blast. The energy is directly noted to be unstable and needs to remain contained inside of its body by the seal on its chest. On the occasion the seal is removed, the energy will run wild, causing Golurk to enter an indiscriminate, vicious rampage, capable of turning a whole town into a mountain of rubble. And as seen in the Pokemon Journeys anime episode Panic at the Park, this also causes the energy to change from pale yellow to a reddish orange and shoot outwards towards the sky, summoning a heavy downpour in the process. Now, the crack and strap on its chest may be a reference to the golem in the Jewish story, the Golem of Prague. where it was controlled by a Shem, a religious parchment, but went berserk as the Shem was removed. The Golem of Prague was also believed to be able to summon the spirits of the dead, likely a reasoning for Golurk's ghost type, though I don't quite believe that. Even when we look at the Golem and Golurk, of course the designs are incredibly similar, with that center seal and crack, but their rampage are told to have occurred in opposite ways to fully explain it. Whereas the Golem of Prague protected the Jewish people, it did not bear the seal on its chest. The story of this golem goes as follows, and you'll find that they are incredibly similar to one another in many ways. According to Jewish Kabbalistic tradition, the source of this, a person who is knowledgeable and faithful enough to know the exact sequence of God's 27 letters can create a human-like being and bring it to life by placing a parchment or a shem with the letters sequence inside of its head. Rabbi Lowe created the golem to protect the Jewish community from pogroms and assist with difficult physical work around the synagogue and the Jewish quarter. Each week, on the eve of the Jewish day of rest, Friday, the rabbi would remove the parchment from the golem's head and the golem would go to sleep, quote unquote. However, one day the rabbi forgot to remove the parchment, and since the golem had no instructions on what to do, he started to destroy the Jewish ghetto and caused havoc in the city. The rabbi realized his mistake and ran after the golem and eventually managed to remove the parchment. Afterwards, Rabbi realized that it would be irresponsible to leave the golem alive, and it appeared he couldn't be trusted and was way too strong to let him continue to be around the Jewish quarter. Instead, the rabbi chose not to revive the golem, and he hid it in the attic of the old new synagogue. A little bit oxymoronic right there in that description, but whatever. Even that last part could explain why we find Golurk in or around so many towers within the world. Now, continuing with Golurk's direct information, they were built by ancient people to serve as a laborer for heavy-duty work and protector of people and Pokemon alike. It is very loyal to its master and will follow its orders without question. Little is known about the energy that it runs on, but it has been theorized to be the product of a perpetual motion machine built inside of Golurk. And just in case you didn't know, a perpetual motion machine was an idea thought about since the Middle Ages, as a way to of course make infinite amounts of energy. After all, if there's a way to create energy without having to expend resources further than the creation of the machine, then of course anyone would want that. Unfortunately, through understanding the laws of thermodynamics, it can be figured out that the creation of a machine like this is absolutely impossible. So it makes you question, how was one possibly created inside of Golurk? Of course, we would never know, it would never be explained, but the idea of AZ or people like him finding ways to create these perpetual motion machines would be a classic trope, a lost archaic artifact. It would align with the idea of creating something like the ultimate weapon, but by those standards, the technology that was used to create said weapon may have also been used in some way to create Golett and Golurk. And despite technology like that being recreated in the Pokemon Adventures manga, we don't see anybody actively creating these Pokemon in the modern day. And given that AZ did wander the world for thousands of years, while we can't confirm every place he went to currently, he still traveled with a Golurk, which is 9'2" or 2.8 meters tall, and so having two incredibly tall individuals standing around at any point would be hard to miss and garner attention. So maybe people ask questions and ideas spread around regarding how to create this automaton, and maybe, just maybe, Golurk may not have a perpetual motion machine, but rather some way to absorb energy, similarly to how the Menhir stones would work. If that is the case, then the ghost typing that Golurk has could actually be due to it absorbing life energy from the world passively. And I know it's a little bit of a jump to assume this, but bear with me. Giving it all the energy it needs to function and never run out of energy, even if it is in a constant rampage. It would serve as the perfect guardian, powerful, never needing to rest, and one that will never disobey orders. And this would make Golurk not the armor itself, but rather the life energy that lives deep inside it, constantly flowing in and out, as Golurk itself is the perpetual motion machine, not that it has a perpetual motion machine inside of it. This level of power and infinite capability also explains some of its more explosive abilities, whether it be the raw power it has or its ability to fly. It can retract its arms and legs inside of its body, creating openings at its wrists and its waist from where it can then blast off energy as if they were rocket thrusters. allowing Golurk to fly at Mach speeds despite its large size. It can also turn into a cannon by retracting its legs, using its arms to anchor itself to the ground and firing massive energy beams from the opening at its waist. This allowed it to serve as a perfect sentry by placing itself onto castle walls and firing at any threats that would come near. And now it's guarding my microphone. Do not fall, please. It took me a couple seconds to actually place you there. To put how fast Golurk can fly into perspective as well, Golurk flying at Mach speed is flying at the speed of sound minimum. If you and I were in a room, Golurk could fly just as fast as it takes for you to hear the words that I am saying. Technically, if you were to put me on the opposite side of a room on a speaker, the second you hear me is the second it would take for Golurk to reach you. That is a speed of roughly 1,235 kilometers an hour or 767 miles per hour. You are never a safe distance from Golurk. While Golurk is effectively a giant mecha robot fit with Spartan-like motifs in the skirt and the helmet, it may also be inspired by the Terracotta Army, a collection of thousands of clay statues in China built circa 210 BCE to protect the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang. Pretty fitting then, since we know it's made of clay and terracotta is clay itself. Though now how about we move on to significant trainers who have Golurk on their team. For example, Go's Golurk, which is shown to be absolutely massive, larger than Golurks normally are, and it served as the primary major appearance within the anime, representing Golurks in animated fashion. Golurk debuted in Raid Battle in the Ruins, where Go and Ash visited the Unova region to explore the Colossus ruins in the desert resort. After hatching from an ancient egg, it engaged in a raid battle with Ash, Go, Kira, and the excavation leader. After a hard-fought battle, Go eventually managed to catch it. Afterward, it was seen in the Cerise laboratory interacting with Go's other Pokemon. In another episode, in Panic in the Park, while trying to stop a fight that broke out between the other Pokemon during a food shortage, the seal on Golurk's chest was knocked off, causing it to go berserk. Ash and Go kept Golurk distracted while Squavit, Farfetch'd, Cubone, and Pidgey put the seal back on. It then, having calmed down, helped protect the Cascoon from the flood caused by its rampage, allowing them to evolve into Dustox. Now, despite its considerable size and strength, this Golurk is a gentle giant outside of battle, as seen during its interactions with some of Go's other Pokemon at Cerise's laboratory, and it doesn't seem to mind the other Pokemon resting on it while it is relaxing. In Restore and Renew, Golurk was shown to be mindful of its own strength, heaving a large boulder out of the way for Go and the others before gently fitting a much smaller stone between its fingertips to examine it for fossils. It's kind of like a golden retriever holding an egg in its mouth, I just realized. As stated previously, if the seal is removed, its energy runs wild, turning from yellow to red, and while on that rampage, it causes significant damage to its surroundings and causes torrential rainfall, just like the move Rain Dance. And alright, everything up to this point made a lot of sense to me, but this last thing used to bother me when I had first realized it. Why does its rampage cause rain? For one reason, and one reason only, could I find that answer. If Golurk is in a rampage, then it means very clearly that Golurk and society that it lives in is in danger. But by giving it the ability to create rain, then it's serving two functions. One is that it can put out any fires by war and destruction. The other is that in the event that Golurk is destroyed or damaged, it can be repaired by the clay and mud that's created by the downpour, or at least little Goletts can be remade to restart the process. And while it doesn't learn Rain Dance naturally, it's a guardian of people and would constantly be near them. So of course, when we look at its TM move list, it can learn Rain Dance via the use of a TM. From here, there are a ton of other smaller appearances where Golurk fights and is only ever shown losing to Ash or to legendary Pokemon like Reshiram and Zekrom, even being shiny in the Reshiram movie to match the white coloration of the legendary dragon. Now, we've already talked a little bit about Hapu's Golurk, though it doesn't serve as her ace and doesn't even appear on her team until title defense battles in the games. Meanwhile, Golurk is Hapu's first known Pokemon in the anime. It helps Hapu with her farming by picking pony radishes out of the ground, and helps its trainer get around by flying around the island. When Hapu assumed Ash should be a radish thief, she used Golurk to battle Ash's Pikachu, and she won. Also, the radish that it pulls out of the ground is absurdly long, and I love it so much. Even Chantal of the Kalos Elite Four has a Golurk, but it still isn't being utilized as her ace, though it is used to fly her and Grimsley around while she continues to write her romance novels. Before we move on to Mega Golurk, I want to talk about Golurk's known artist, James Turner, who created some absolute banger Pokemon, such as Phantump and Trevenant, Buzzwole, Guzzlord, Poipole, Naganadel, G-Max Gengar, the Galarian Zigzagoon line, Tatsugiri, many of these Pokemon shiny forms, and many other Pokemon and art. So, thank you, James. Not only have you created one of the best regional variants, the best Ultra Beasts, excluding Necrozma, because Necrozma's pretty dope, but you also gave my Gengar a new form, so, you know, I gotta be a big fan of you. Oh! Finally, we hit Mega Golurk, my #1 pick for who would be getting a Mega ever since Legends EA was released. I have video after video mentioning how if Golurk did not get this Mega, I would be finding my way to turn off the sun, because clearly we're all in the wrong timeline and we need to restart. And the moment in which I first saw Mega Golurk is the moment it felt like the world was right. It felt like magic was in the air. Give me the Golurk. Give me Samurai Golurk, Mega. Give me something. I don't know what. Oh no. Look at that! It's all the energy pouring out from it! Now look at this beauty of a Titan. It doesn't gain any weight whatsoever, by the way, but it gains height, only because the Mega energy flowing into its body has caused it to become absolutely overloaded with energy, and that now explodes from its body. But there's way more to this than meets the eye. For starters, all of the lights that we would see in Golurk's spirals are all off, and all of that golden energy is exploding outwards from Golurk's body. And of course, there's a few details that I love about this more than anything else. For one, of its 2 eyes, only one of them is bursting with energy while the other one is seemingly empty or off. This in turn reflects not only a Z, as one of his eyes are covered, but also follows a very strange pattern that I've noticed in Pokemon, and a pattern that you can find in a number of other pieces of media. It's this idea of people or creatures having accomplished something impossible, or having come very close to death and coming back to life. Usually, these are the ones who have seen the afterlife, have seen a truth that only belongs to the gods, have attained power or knowledge that should only belong to gods, or have walked the tightrope of life and death. This then ties not only into AZ, who has conquered life and death through his ultimate weapon, but also Lysander, who became L, Volo, who also has an extended lifespan, and at least is the only person in main canon lore to have teamed up with Giratina, Cynthia, who rediscovered Arceus in the modern day and met Arceus with us, Kogita, who was best friends with Enamorus, and finally Mega Chandelure, whose single eye sees into the afterlife. And just because I want to mentally torture you, all of them have this in common with Sans, who has seen the infinite timelines, giving him knowledge and power beyond what any other Undertale character has. Go ahead, look through all the different media you can, and find your one-eyed demigods, immortals, and characters with powers beyond the norm, and see just how many of them have a singular glowing eye, have only one eye, or hide one of their eyes. Honestly, if you really wanted to, you could trace this back to Kakashi, you know, back in Naruto. Now, if you want to know more, I have a whole video on this that just keeps coming back up in newer videos. It feels almost like it's a required watch at this point. Back with Mega Golurk, though, the other major thing that I love regarding the energy bursting from its body is that we see it wrapping around Golurk. Look at the X across the body. It's not just a pattern, but more like something grabbing, holding on tightly to something and not wanting to let go. Arms crossed around the front as the creature grabs from Golurk's back. Though in this case, the creature is the real Golurk. Golurk is the energy from within. It wraps around the armbands, it wraps around the leg bands, the shoulder joints, and then of course, out to the back shoulder area of Golurk, as though they were large wings extending from its body. I'm willing to say that this all goes even further in that these wings are very familiar looking, being opposite in color but having similar design to Valerie's clothing, specifically her sleeves. I'd already thought that these wings, quote-unquote, of energy on Golurk had reminded me of butterfly or angel wings, and with Valerie having a similar design, it kind of seals the deal for me. This could then let Golurk serve as not just any guardian anymore, but a guardian angel or angel of death. A Pokemon that has received so much energy that it has fully ascended. The energy has become so much that it has left the seal barely hanging on, barely attached, but it isn't going on a rampage. Instead, we have a different problem at hand. Mega Golurk's internal energy has been stimulated by Mega Evolution, causing its seal to no longer be able to keep it inside. Due to this, Mega Golurk exists in a constant state of near-instant detonation. This makes Mega Golurk similar to a nuclear reactor in overload, which once again ties us back to something that many people connect to AZ and the ultimate weapon, which is nuclear energy. Think of it this way. AZ created something that could give life or take many lives, a mechanical marvel, a alchemic marvel that goes beyond imagination at the time and provides or takes an immense amount of energy. And of course, just like nuclear power has gone awry to create Chernobyl due to human negligence, we also find that Anj in ZA had reached critical mass and needed to be resolved. The ties of nuclear disaster are pretty clear, and now we have it tied to a specific Pokemon in the form of Golurk, our guardian angel that serves to protect people as it always has while holding onto its shell, doing everything it can to not explode and turn into that angel of death for everything that it served to protect. The last little detail we have to talk about is that Mega Golurk will launch its fists like rockets when using certain moves, and it is actually incredibly endearing to me. All because my own favorite Dragon Ball character, especially because of Team 4-Star, is Android 16, who also sends off his fists like rockets. This is something we'll see in robots or mechs in anime, especially old Gundam shows. So this is definitely a miniature love letter to those mechanical titans. And man, I personally love it so much. I never really got into Gundam or mech anime in general, but there is one show I loved and still love from the first time I ever saw it, which of course is Gurren Lagann in all of its glory. Now what's strange is that of all the Megas that are new to us as players, even in Mega Dimension, the only ones that are truly new are Darkrai and maybe Heatran. Otherwise, none of the other ones to my memory have been noted as new or recent in discovery like Dragonite was. So somewhere along the line in the past 5 years, many of these Pokemon have been seen, and the memories of those Pokemon have been brought into Kalos and drawn upon by Darkrai. But if you want that all explained properly, I have another video for you to check out. Now, of course, before we close out, there's no way I could be done with this video without mentioning the #1 Golurk enjoyer ever, a great supporter of the channel and a fantastic friend, Biggins. He was another vital part of helping the channel when it was incredibly small. I mean, like, maybe sub 2,000 subscribers. And while this channel is still absolutely small, believe it or not, it could not have gotten to even this point without support from people like him and him. After all, it's why there are multiple Golurk emotes and even members are called giving Golurks in the Discord server. So make sure you at least say hi to him in the comments. But that's all for today. What are your thoughts? Leaving a comment, as I stated, boosts the reach of a video, and I love reading your comments. The best from last week was from BP Data Center, that's a really funny name, who left a wildly long comment, which was very in-depth, on the science of Cosmoem not being a protostar, as I often call it, but rather a singularity or black hole through the red and blue shifts seen within it, the Schwarzschild radius, its incredible maximum weight and density, and it being unrelated to a brown dwarf, which is what it would be if it actually was what I claimed. I genuinely love it when you guys are able to correct me or teach me something new and be polite about it. I encourage it. Since I am not a team, I am one person, I am bound to get something wrong, I am bound to miss something. So leave your comments. Fun, happy, educational. I do try to read them all, even if I'm not exactly responding to them all. In addition, again, if of course you enjoyed this and are new, subscribe. I have literal weeks, if not months worth of content to listen to. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can get early access to videos, membership, exclusive videos, and behind the scenes info by becoming a member for as little as $3 a month. It goes a long way to help the channel, so thank you to the members of the channel on here and on Patreon. And with that then, as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I will see you next time. Bye!